Welcome. I'm Francie Jane, the founder of Terawatt. At Terawatt, we believe everyone deserves a good coach. If you don't know us, we're a marketplace that makes it easy and affordable to find impactful and group coaching. We're obsessed with data, and we're always looking for ways to get smarter about our stakeholders. So last year, we started working on creating a survey. We ended up with a format that asked two parallel sets of questions to HR managers and rising professionals. Our hypothesis was that these two groups would see the world differently and that the divergence would surprise HR managers. We found that yes, professionals rank their employers' professional development offerings lower and less effective than HR managers. So that was, I guess, not unexpected. But we also found that employees named professional development as their top benefit, and we found a correlation between a lack of professional development and low company satisfaction rankings. But we found two other things that we weren't expecting. One, women rated professional development programs lower than men and reported their existing at all lower than men. Why? Two, Black women ranked professional development a much higher benefit than the average professional. Why? So we'll be looking deeper into those questions for our 2022 professional development survey. So stay tuned. So we didn't do this survey on our own. We turned to an expert. We turned to an expert to make sure we got it right the first time. So for the first part of this webinar, we're going to introduce you to Mary Beth Mashkovas about how she helped us design and conduct the survey. Hopefully, she'll give you some good ideas about how you can delve into questions of your own. And then for the second part of the webinar, I'll speak to two incredible women who are experts in their respective fields. Sharika Ekpo and Pooja Jane Link will discuss how the Terawatt survey results fit into their experience and how the results can be helpful to companies. So now I'll turn over to Mary Beth. Mary Beth, can you discuss your role in Terawatt's survey?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me, Francie. Hi, my name is Mary Beth, and I own and run a company called Insight Lime Analytics. And what we do is work with brands to create impact through surveys and understanding their consumer data. And so with Terawatt, Francie approached me and wanted to explore how she could use data more in the business and also to talk about the business. And we went through a whole journey of deciding what would be some questions that we could ask and how could we get an understanding of both employers and employees from start to finish to see what the differences were and confirm some theories that she had, and then also see what else we could find out. And when you go through a formal design process like this with a survey design company, we're looking at the main goal and theories of the project, as well as how to design questions that eliminate as much bias from them as possible so that you're not guiding consumers to the answer that you want, which I know everyone has probably taken a survey where you thought that the answers to the questions weren't, what you really wanted to answer them to. And so the companies sometimes set up surveys and don't realize that they're boxing their consumers into an answer that they may not want to have. So the general process of this is that we actually went through multiple iterations to get those questions right. We wanted to make sure that we were using the right terminology when we were talking to these people that was not just what we as industry professionals understand professional development to be, but also how employees would perceive that and what words they would use. So we scoped out audiences, and both of the audiences were at least 1,000 each. And before we sent out to this really big audience, what we did was drafted the questions that we had and sent out both a testing survey where we had more open-ended questions and were able to define what are those terms people are using, what are they actually looking for, and not have them boxed in by multiple choice questions. And then the other thing that we did was we did live user interviews so that we had people answer in their own words on video what they thought about these topics, both employers and employees. And these things informed the final questions on the survey. And then what was nice about that on top of that is that we had questions that were based on scales that make it easy to see sentiment across a wide variety and also what the variation of the sentiment is. So does everybody feel like they don't have enough support in one area, or is it really varied? And then when we went into the data and analyzed, this is when we saw these other aspects that we weren't really expecting, which was the difference between men and women in their opinions, especially in the employee surveys, and some of the things that went deeper into those demographics, where there was definitely some more stories or questions that came out of it. And that's the beauty of getting to look at data in that way, is that even if you get your original question answered, which was, yes, there's a difference in opinion between employees and employers about how good their programs are, but there is this whole other aspect that, wait a minute, there's definitely opinions that are varied depending on who you are and your background. And there's so much more that we want to learn about what's going on with women, and is there really, what are the differences, and how can a platform talk more to that? And then, what are those issues that, you aren't really hearing about, or you're only hearing about anecdotally, and then the data really does speak for itself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to introduce and turn it over to Sharika Ekpo and Pooja Jane Link. I'm adding them here now. So Sharika Ekpo is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Anaplan. She joined Anaplan as the inaugural Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer in June 2021. In this newly created role, Sharika works closely with Anaplan's executive leadership, human resource, legal, and employee resource groups to advance the company's already progressive efforts to create and maintain a corporate culture that values the contributions of all members of its workplace. Sharika has nearly 20 years of strategic human capital, talent management, and development experience. Over the course of her career, Sharika has worked at Google, JP Morgan Chase, General Electric, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Her contributions in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion have been honored with several professional and community awards. Sharika has recently been appointed to the Consumer Technology Association Board of Industry Leaders and is on the board of directors at Skylight Digital and Aqua Leisure. Pooja Jane Link is the Executive Vice President of COCOL. She drives research that examines workplace culture and the systemic change needed to create equity. She's inspired by the use of business as a force for social change. As a co-lead of COCOL's research and advisory services, Pooja listens to the voices of employees and considers how data can highlight power dynamics that inhibit growth and success for underrepresented talent. Pooja led the research for studies such as Being Black in Corporate America, The Sponsor Dividend, and Wonder Women in STEM, and companies that champion them. Her articles have appeared in Business Insider, Harvard Business Review, and Scientific American. She has spoken at organizations such as Vanguard, Interpublic Group, and UBS, and at conferences such as the Grace Hopper Celebration, SIFMA's Diversity and Inclusion Conference, and the Society of Women Engineers Annual Conference. So Sharika and Pooja, thank you for joining us. We'll start with Sharika. Thank you for joining us, Sharika.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Our survey surprised us with the variances in how women, and Black women especially, view professional development. You've had a career in government, banking, and technology, which gives you an extraordinary vantage point. What is important for professional development for women of color, and how do women of color think about professional development that's different from the way perhaps someone in senior management would think about it?
Thanks so much for having me, Francie. It's a pleasure to join you during this discussion. I can only speak from my own personal experience. So I am a Black woman and have always identified as such. And as a result, I've seen some opportunities fall in my lap because of my identity. And in other times, I've been shut out of opportunities because of my identity. But what I can say is I've truly benefited from professional development. I was in a leadership development program at JP Morgan Chase, as well as General Electric. In addition to that, while in the federal government for 10 years, I was in a leadership development program with the Department of Homeland Security. And even as I matriculated through university, I was always in some sort of leadership development type of program. And I think those programs just gave me additional tools to make me competitive in the workforce. And that was extremely helpful because oftentimes I would be, if not the only Black woman, one of a few women or women of color in the space. And that professional development gave me some additional confidence to either apply for a job or speak up to take on an extra project or two. And so I can definitely see how professional development has helped women as well as women of color advance in the workplace in a way that may be different than other groups. In terms of the way senior management looks at professional development, I mean, many managers look at it as like a cost, whether it's a financial cost or a human resource cost. Because if I ask to go to a training event, the first thing a manager thinks about is how much time will you be out of the office and who's going to do your work in your absence. So, I really encourage leaders to think about the confidence that professional development brings, the additional skill set and upskilling that it brings, as well as the retention tool that it could be to help women, specifically in the technology industry, stay and actually find a strong career path that will keep them either at a specific company or in a specific industry.
Well, as you're saying that, thank you. That's incredible. And as you're saying that, I keep thinking, could part of the issue be also that you have managers who haven't been trained to understand the benefits and sort of give space to employees? I mean, what have you seen either at Anaplan or other places where you've been? I mean, are managers being trained to kind of give space to people for professional development?
Well, I will just tell you, and I will speak more broadly than Anaplan, but just in the tech industry alone, what I've seen is that managers get promoted based on their technical ability, not for their ability to lead a team or having strong empathy or good people skills. And so the question of whether or not they're being trained, we don't allot as much time to the training and upskilling as managers as we should. So there are some gaps in terms of leadership skills that I see. And I do think that if we equipped our managers with empathy, with the understanding and the benefits of retention, as well as core competencies and development, that we would see a greater return on our investment, which is these professional development opportunities. So I would tell people, if you are a manager and you're thinking about how to increase either retention on your team, or you're thinking about how you should create a varied perspective or skill set with your employees, then give them the opportunity to not only go to that conference, but to take on that additional project, or to have participate in a networking program or a mentorship program that will give the employees experiences that are outside of their day-to-day function.
It makes me also think, we can talk about this later, it makes me also think about whether there might be metrics for managers promoting their employees to do other things besides work on projects that generate revenue. I mean, something we can get into, but just
absolutely.
So Pooja, let's turn it over to you. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It feels like there's a lot of research on what is working in HR, and there are a lot of people who want to run effective human resources. What do you see as the most effective ways that companies are doing to respond to this call and put insights into action and tangible benefits?
Yeah. Well, thank you also for having me. And Sharika, I think what you shared really would resonate with a lot of people in the way of your own personal experience. I'd love to just reflect on, the findings you shared, Francie, about women and especially Black women ranking professional development as more important. Our research has examined many reasons why this might be. Black women are less likely to receive those development opportunities organically. And so having intentionally crafted programs can be a really meaningful way for folks to gain access. They not only help with development and gaining skills, but also learning the unwritten rules of an organization, helping folks build networks, and really gaining access to potential advocates and sponsors. People of color in general are said to be over-mentored, under-sponsored. They're getting advice, but not advocacy. And, leadership development programs are often put in this box of you're learning, some specific skill set or something specific. But part of what they're doing is helping break down some of the barriers to relationship capital, and they really help expanding that network and gaining, pathways to sponsorship for the folks that are a part of them. And I think in terms of, to your question of there's a lot of research out there and what can companies do, it's really think about, the fact that workplaces, as much as we might aspire for them to be meritocracies, they are not and have not been that for so long. And we know that relationships are a key factor in employee success, but there isn't equal access to them. So thinking about how that access can be, democratized, how you can build pathways for folks to connect across lines of difference is a really important step for, changing kind of what the face of leadership looks like and really supporting the bottom line growth of an organization.
Thank you. I love that. Tell me, Pooja, have you seen some programs that encourage access to relationships? Because I find that one of the things that's tricky about research is sort of putting it into action. And so for anyone who's out there trying to say like, oh my God, I love to do that. What are some of the really awesome ways that people are handling that?
Yeah, so I'll just say, the organization I'm a part of, Copal, we've done over a decade of research on sponsorship, really looking at the concept, looking at it theoretically, looking at the payoffs of it. But in our decade of research, we've also started to work with companies to develop very targeted sponsorship programs to help them think about how to build these connections very intentionally between leaders and high potential up and coming leaders, and think about, how do we boost diversity in that next rank of leadership by creating a program specifically targeting, Black women, Latinas, whatever group you may be looking to boost into the leadership ranks that is not building these relationships naturally. What are the different things we can do to help foster those relationships and help them grow and nurture them a bit organically and a bit intentionally? I'd say other leadership development programs that, may have a totally different focus, not just on that relationship building. One thing that organizations can think about is for certain programs, you do want to have them be very targeted. This is our leadership development program for our Black population, for our Asian employees, for our employees with disabilities, whatever it might be. But for other programs, you can think about bringing folks together, not having it be a siloed targeted program, but something where you're including employees across lines of difference. And that way, there's also a component of the program that is building that network and helping them gain a better understanding of each other. I had a conversation recently where someone said, the more I know you, the less that I can be biased about you. And so having that, collaboration exist is a really key way to breaking down bias and building stronger relationships across an organization.
Awesome. Well, one thing I know that we had talked in earlier conversations about was this idea of belonging and that being a really important part for everyone at companies, and it's usually less likely to happen among women of color. For both of you, for Shrika or Pooja, can we talk a little bit about ways that you see belonging being done well by HR? And is it like you said, Pooja, like could it be almost like affinity groups, like or is it more like having cross, different parts of companies working together on a subject? Or I would love to just hear what you guys think can be done from the HR perspective. I know, Shrika, you said earlier that you didn't think it was an employee's responsibility. It was HR's responsibility to create a culture of belonging. And I'd love to just kind of get into that a little bit because it's such an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. So, belonging is really just an emotional need to be connected. It is a human element of having an affinity to something, someone, a group, an organization. And when I think about belonging, it is really predicated on respect for differences, respect for similarities. And a lot of times, I do believe that HR is the conduit by which belonging should be infused into a culture of an organization. But it is really the responsibility of all employees, right? Because I think a lot of times people start to look at how am I different from you instead of how am I different like you. We are all different, and we have to figure out how to celebrate those differences and understand where there are overlaps and how we can learn from each other. I'm working with the Haas School of Business at Berkeley right now on a belonging index project. And a lot of what we're trying to do is identify a global framework for belonging, because it does mean different things in different countries and different cultures. And we have to think about that as we try to come up with a universal approach to it. So what I will say is, as HR professionals, we should really think about our overall company culture. Company culture is supported and sustained by its leadership team. So one thing I love about Anaplan is that from our CEO on down, company culture, integrity, respect, all of those are the core values of our company. And then everything builds on top of that. So it is easy for a new employee at Anaplan to feel connected and to have that sense of belonging because of our core values of openness and tenaciousness and inclusivity. Those types of things are woven throughout our business meetings, our Anaplan Connected planning tool, as well as our culture. And so when you do that and you have that leadership commitment, I do think it's easier for employees to understand their role in belonging.
And I'll just add on to that at Coquel, we did actually a 4-part study on the idea of belonging last year. In our first study, The Power of Belonging, we actually defined the term as sort of when employees feel seen, supported, connected, and proud. And we built a 24-item measure of belonging to really think about how what belonging looks like, how can we quantify it and measure it to then understand how to sort of track progress against building that culture of belonging. We also shared key actions for people at all levels to really build belonging. And I think just as Sharika said, there's an organizational element to this of what the org has to do, but there's things that key actions that senior leaders, managers, peers can be taking to reinforce and sustain that culture. And our study was actually global as well. I totally agree with there has to be global resonance here. There are different insider and outsider groups depending on where you're located. And we found that there were different solutions that worked in the different countries. In some countries, for peers, providing praise was really meaningful, but in others, it actually wasn't because, that it could come across as insincere or not genuine. It has to be culturally specific, and for individuals and especially for leaders in HR and in DE&I to understand what are the culturally fluent ways to be building that culture is really important. I think working towards belonging is also, it's a move from having a culture that's competitive, insisting on competition with peers, to one of greater collaboration. And part of moving away from that zero-sum mindset or that scarcity mindset is saying that as we support each other, as we build this culture together where we can all belong and work together, we're bettering the business and the bottom line, and we're actually creating more opportunity for all. So we're helping ourselves by helping others. This isn't generosity. This isn't, me paying it forward, but rather me investing in myself and my organization by investing in my peers. And so there's, I think, a shift from sort of zero-sum scarcity mindset to growth mindset, to expanding the pie and understanding how a culture of belonging, greater equity within the organization can really benefit all.
Yeah, that was fascinating. What I want to follow up on with both of you guys is this idea of 360 reviews and also peer reviews, and whether, is that a way that companies can adjust perhaps a culture of competition, or what are ways that companies can say, okay, listen, like we kind of did it the old way, we want to morph into the new way, and is that something that can help with change, with someone who might be having trouble with maybe belonging issues or retention issues or recruitment issues?
Yeah. We've been seeing in our research that 360 reviews, they're one of the company practices that really are strongly linked to employee perceptions of fairness in a performance evaluation, and especially for employees of color who are more likely to feel like their evaluation might be a bit biased when it's coming from that single manager, to know that it was informed by a multitude of voices that they often get to choose, voices that are then pulled together, calibrated and combined to deliver a broader array of feedback, can be really meaningful. It's it can help mitigate bias. But I think the other key thing in 360 is just as we move towards a culture of more surround sound feedback, one thing organizations can keep in mind is we're also shifting the way we work. And right now, a lot of organizations are still in fully remote or somewhat flexible work models. Hybrid work is where a lot of companies are moving to in the next year. And what we've seen with remote work is that, feedback conversations are hard in general. Feedback often doesn't cross lines of difference. And when we're remote, it just doesn't happen at all. It's missing. And so as we think about a 360, as we think about any process that's really standardizing and confirming the value and need for feedback, ensuring that it's happening in a systematic, process-driven way is crucial to ensuring that it happens at all.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, Pooja. And I think the other thing to note is feedback for people of color is a luxury, because there are many people who do not get the feedback, primarily because managers don't understand how to deliver it across lines of difference. So instead of delivering the feedback and doing it wrong, they just don't do it at all. And so that's something that I've experienced, and in some of my previous positions have been in a position to do what we called performance review audits. And that is where we would actually look at performance reviews for certain target demographics to ensure that there was no coded language in the review, that there was no intentional bias infused into the review. Because while 360 feedback can be great, it's only good if you're getting the feedback, right? And so we just wanted to make sure that there was some balance there. The other thing that I wanted to mention is feedback is fantastic, but if it's given annually, that's no good. So companies need to evolve from this annual performance rating cycle to even biannually, quarterly, or just implement more one-on-ones, basic one-on-ones on a biweekly or monthly basis, where you can give bite-sized type of feedback so that employees can improve sooner and deliver the results that we are expecting.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, because it's also more what the millennials and Gen Z are looking for too, right? They want more bite size. So it also speaks to kind of the younger generation who's joining the workforce. Well, another question I have is, there was just recently a headline, I forget if it's New York Times or who published it, but talking about ERGs, how they can kind of be co-opted a little bit by leadership. And one of the comments in the article was, well, I didn't want to be part of the ERG if it was just cultural. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so can you talk a little bit about what the difference is between a cultural ERG versus like maybe a full ERG? And so we understand like what's the ideal and versus what's like barely getting it done.
Yeah. I'd love to start, and then Sharika, I bet you have some more applied examples to share, but I can just talk about the evolution and history. So these groups originally started as affinity networks in their early iterations, just to get employees of a shared background together to build community. They then switched to employee resource groups, and the focus became more about supporting the employees that were a part of it. How can we offer leadership development or training or whatever the need for that group is? And they've evolved in recent years to now become more business resource groups, where it's actually saying, all right, this group exists. We have this really amazing talent pool that also has deep market insights into a given segment of the population. And so for leaders, tapping into a business resource group or a BRG is saying, you have this wealth of information, let us use it and give you some sort of high impact, high visibility project to work on. So it's actually also encouraging employees who are a member of these groups to participate so that they gain that access and that investment into their own career by being able to be on a project that will have business impact and business value that can boost their brand, their ability to deliver and be something that they take with them that's meaningful, but also supports the business and its needs.
That is absolutely right. And I will tell you, Pooja, Google, the last company I worked with, did this very, very well. At Google, they have something called 20% projects, and that will give employees the opportunity to, focus on their work in their day job 80% of the time. But what I saw in these 20% projects is that for employees who were involved in the business resource groups, they would do a project that is completely outside of their job function, but that project will give them a new skill set and greater visibility to management. And so that is exactly what historically underrepresented groups need. That type of access and visibility gives them opportunity to new jobs, new managers, new markets, and new opportunities. So the BRG evolution has definitely helped. Back to your question, Francie, about the difference between the two. What I am finding is that each company is different and each community need is different. So for instance, at Anaplan, as we birthed our Black employees of African descent ERG, that was a direct reflection of what was happening in Minneapolis, which is where we have a huge employee base for Anaplan. But when I look at some of our other ERGs, like our Latinx ERG and maybe even our neurodiverse ERG, they have more community feel to it as well. But that may not be the case for our Anaplan Able group. And so what I have encouraged ERG leaders to do is to serve their communities first. So while the business needs the additional data set or the market insights and expertise, these employee resource groups are an opportunity for people to feel like they belong, because oftentimes they're the only ones on their team. And so there is space for us to have a community ERG as well as a business ERG. And that's the integration that we're seeing, evolve at this moment.
That's awesome. Thank you. I actually was thinking about, as you were talking about Google, and they're famous, right, for having this 20% project carve out, right? And it was like Google Maps was a result of someone who was just really curious about, satellite maps. Could maybe we learn something about Google managers? Like, how are managers not freaking out that one day a week their employees were like goofing off looking at satellite maps? Do you know what I mean? I would love to hear about that, because it seems like maybe that could lead us down a path of like greater elucidation about professional development in the real world, like in live,
Well, one thing I will say, and this is not the case with all employers, but Google really manages outcomes and not time. So as we think about this hybrid workforce, people want to see you in the office and they want to see you at your desk and they want to see you, go to lunch and come back on time and all that other kind of mess. That is definitely not the case. And so what I think happens is with the cross collaboration that happens within the various product areas at Google, the management of outcomes versus time helps people compartmentalize what they need to do. And the fact that these 20% projects are also added into your performance review is also permission to actually work on the project. So to me, that's the ultimate goal. If you allow an employee to lend his or her time or their time to a specific project that's outside of their scope, their normal scope or duties, then he or she should actually get the opportunity to document that in some sort of way that can have financial gain and or otherwise. And I think that's one thing that I really did appreciate about Google. Any and everything that I was working on was captured, and it was captured not only by my manager, but peer reviews. I would ask specific people to give me input into my overall performance management packet, because I could select who I wanted my peer reviewers to be. So that definitely adds another layer of support to that 20% project.
That also makes me think about this discussion of, leaders of ERGs and whether that's reimbursed, how that's recognized, reimbursed, all those kinds of things. I would love to hear, again, like sort of like best practices for, if you are developing an ERG or an affinity group or a BRG, how, besides, anyway, I'd love to just hear any thoughts you have about it, because I think that it's just fascinating to me. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who would love to learn more.
These groups have been around for decades. They're not new, but I think that idea of compensating someone for the time spent in this group is a bit newer. I know LinkedIn got a lot of headlines because they're, compensating ERG leads an extra $10,000 a year, which is amazing. It really places a value on this work as having true business impact and as being of value to the organization, and allows for an individual who's a part of it to know that I'm being recognized and rewarded for the work I'm doing here. And it is that, I think it's that recognition of this is not a side project or a hobby or something I'm doing, just for fun. This is a core part of my day-to-day job that the organization sees value in. That's the signal that I think comes from the monetary incentive. And that's the sort of the shift in, if these are groups that are going to have a business impact, that's the shift that needs to accompany that.
I agree 1000%. And by the way, my first action as Chief Diversity Officer at Anaplan was to reward our ERG leaders. And in the first 45 days, I went to the CEO and I said, Frank, your ERG leaders have been working overtime to keep the morale high, to keep the business units connected during a global pandemic throughout this social unrest. What is it that we can do for them? And we were able to come up with the 3 C's. The first is a cash bonus. So we were able to give them some sort of financial recognition and reward for their work. The second was career development, because why not? We know that that's what employees like. And so we were able to offer a license to our Coursera online platform for a year to do whatever type of training and development that our ERG leads wanted. And the third was around coaching. We have now set them up with group coaching. So they now have a bi-monthly check-in with a vendor that we've hired to really help them, not only as they continue to form and provide structure for their ERGs, but also their own personal growth and development. So we did the 3 C's, and then we did one final thing, which was just recognition at a company-wide event. And so our CEO was able to thank and name our ERG leaders and thank them for their service. So that is a best practice. So I would tell people, if you're unable to do all of the 3 C's, think about one of the C's and see how you can implement that at your company.
Alice, or is there anything you'd like to add before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, I love the 3 C's. I love the added recognition. I totally agree. Not every organization is going to be able to do all of that robustly, and you don't have to. It is the signal to the employee that this matters, and in the way that it matters, have it matter to you and reward and recognize them as such. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much, Sharika and Pooja and Mary Beth. And we've put, what do you call it? In the chat, we have our survey, and then we have it on our website, and you can come find me in the booth at the techhr.com, HR Tech conference. So thank you, ladies, so much. It was a real pleasure, and hopefully we can get us all together another time for another conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Have a good time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.